The December air bit at my face as I walked down Maple Drive, checking house numbers against my phone. Number 2187 emerged from the darkness, a sprawling colonial with white trim that looked pristine even in the dim streetlight. This would be my last babysitting job before heading off to college next fall. At 19, I was probably getting too old for it anyway, but the Harrises were offering $25 an hour to watch their 4-year-old daughter Emma while they attended a holiday party. Mrs. Harris had found me through a neighborhood app. She'd been impressed by my references and experience, though I noticed she hadn't left any previous sitter reviews herself. The house looked exactly like the photos she'd sent: immaculate landscaping, tasteful Christmas lights, and a shiny BMW in the driveway. A security camera tracked my movement as I approached the front door. The interior was even more impressive. Everything gleamed: the marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the spotless mirrors. Mrs. Harris, elegant in a black cocktail dress, gave me a quick tour while Mr. Harris waited by the door, checking his watch. They were a striking couple, though something felt off about their practiced smiles. Emma was already asleep upstairs, they explained, and shouldn't wake until morning. "Help yourself to anything in the kitchen," Mrs. Harris said, pointing out snacks and emergency numbers on the counter. "Emma's room is at the end of the upstairs hall. The monitor's on the coffee table. We should be back around 1. They left quickly, the BMW's headlights sweeping across the windows before disappearing into the night. I settled onto the leather couch, pulling up Netflix on their massive TV. The house was silent except for the hum of the heating system. On the baby monitor, I could see Emma's room, just a dim shape under blankets, rising and falling with steady breaths. I tried to shake off my unease. Rich people were often weird, and this was an easy $100 to sit and watch movies. Around 10 p.m., the doorbell camera alert popped up on the tablet they'd left me. The porch was empty, but I noticed fresh footprints in the light rain that had started. I checked all the doors, securely locked. The security system was armed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Just after 11, I heard a thump from upstairs. The monitor showed Emma still sleeping peacefully, but I needed to check. The second floor was darker, family photos lining the hallway. As I approached Emma's room, I noticed something odd. The faces in every photo were blurred or turned away. Not a single clear shot of Emma or her parents. My heart stopped when I opened the door. The bed was empty, covers thrown back. The window was closed and locked, but the stuffed animals on the shelf seemed to be arranged differently than before. I searched every room upstairs, calling Emma's name softly. Nothing. Back in her room, I noticed something tucked under the pillow, a child's drawing of stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and Emma. But the Emma figure was crossed out in angry red crayon. That's when I heard it, a child's giggle from the basement. I called the Harrises immediately, but their phones went straight to voicemail. The police were my next call, but I couldn't leave without checking the basement. The steps creaked as I descended, phone flashlight illuminating water-stained walls. A heavy metal door stood at the bottom, padlocked from the outside. Another giggle, definitely behind the door. The padlock was new, its key hanging on a nail nearby. My hands shook as I unlocked it. The door swung open to reveal a finished room with children's drawings covering the walls. In the center sat a small table with a tea set, and there was Emma, but not the Emma I'd seen in the blurred photos upstairs. This Emma was older, maybe 7 or 8, thin and pale with angry eyes. "They always fall for it," she said quietly. "The fake photos, the baby monitor recording, the perfect house. Mom and Dad are good at finding new sitters to play with me." She stood, and I saw newspaper clippings scattered on the floor, headlines about missing babysitters spanning several years. I don't remember running up the stairs or the police breaking down the door. The next few hours were a blur of questions and cameras. The Harrises weren't at any party. They were already hundreds of miles away, like always. Emma, the real Emma, hadn't been seen in 3 years when she disappeared along with a babysitter. Her parents had been using her disappearance to lure in other sitters, keeping her isolated in the basement while they planned their next victim. The investigation revealed everything. The Harrises weren't even her real parents. They'd taken Emma during their first kidnapping and raised her to help trap others. The house had been their latest setup, purchased with money from their victims. They found 7 bodies buried in the woods behind previous properties. I was meant to be number 8. I still see a therapist twice a week. Emma is with a foster family now, learning to be a normal kid again. Sometimes I drive past that house on Maple Drive, now empty and up for sale. The security camera still turns to track my car, even though it's not connected to anything anymore. I deleted all my babysitting apps. These days, I work at a coffee shop where I can see everyone coming and going, where nothing is hidden behind perfect smiles and pristine walls. But every time the door chimes, I check for blurred faces and practiced smiles, wondering if the Harrises are still out there, looking for their next sitter. The Thompson farm sat at the end of a long dirt road, 30 minutes from the nearest neighbor. At 17, I wasn't thrilled about spending my summer nights babysitting in the middle of nowhere, but Mrs. Thompson paid double the usual rate. She was a nurse working night shifts at the county hospital, and her husband had passed away last spring, leaving her alone with 6-year-old twins, Ryan and Rose. The house itself made me uneasy. Peeling wallpaper, creaky floorboards, and a pervasive smell of damp earth. But Mrs. Thompson was desperate for help, and I needed the money for college. That first night, she showed me around while the twins played in the kitchen. "They're good kids," she said, dark circles under her eyes. "Just don't let them in the barn. John's tools are still out there." The twins were identical. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same unsettling habit of finishing each other's sentences. Their bedroom was the only cheerful space in the house, walls covered in their artwork. But something about their drawings bothered me. They were all of the barn, drawn in black crayon with a red door, over and over again. After putting the twins to bed that first night, I noticed the barn through the kitchen window. The moonlight revealed peeling red paint and boards hammered over the windows. The door was secured with a heavy chain and padlock. A rational precaution to keep kids away from dangerous tools, but something felt wrong about how new that lock looked compared to everything else. The nights fell into a routine. I'd make dinner, help with baths, read stories, and then watch TV until Mrs. Thompson returned at dawn. The twins never gave me trouble, but they whispered to each other constantly. Sometimes I'd catch fragments. "He's still there," or "The door's not strong enough." When I asked what they meant, they'd just smile and change the subject. One night, bored, I Googled the farm's history. John Thompson's death had made the local news. A farming accident, the article said. But something else caught my eye. 3 farm workers had disappeared from neighboring properties over the past year. The most recent vanished just a week before John's death. A summer storm hit during my 6th night. The twins were unusually agitated, refusing to sleep. "He walks in the corn when it rains," Rose whispered. Ryan nodded. "Dad says the lock won't hold tonight." Before I could respond, the power went out. In the lightning flashes, I saw movement in the cornfield, paths being pushed apart by something large moving toward the barn. The twins disappeared while I was looking for candles. Wet footprints led to the back door, left wide open to the rain. My flashlight beam caught small muddy handprints on the wall, leading toward the barn. I called Mrs. Thompson, but the storm had killed the cell signal. The only working phone was in the kitchen, but when I tried it, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A second click on the line, and breathing. I had no choice but to check the barn. The chain hung broken from the door, swinging in the wind. My flashlight revealed boot prints in the mud, adult-sized, fresh, leading inside. The twins' smaller prints followed them. The barn door creaked as another lightning flash illuminated the interior. The floor was concrete, not dirt like I'd expected, and riddled with dark stains. The barn had been converted into something horrible. Industrial freezers lined one wall. Steel tables held medical instruments. Polaroids were pinned everywhere. Missing farm workers, each photographed through different stages of... I couldn't look at them. A door in the floor led to a cellar. The twins' whispers echoed up from below, along with another voice, deep, familiar, belonging to a man who was supposed to be dead. John Thompson wasn't dead. He was stretched out on a surgical table, his body a patchwork of scars and staples. The twins stood next to him, holding hands, completely calm. "We helped Daddy fix himself," Rose said. "The workers' parts don't last long," Ryan added. Their father's hand moved toward a scalpel. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. Mrs. Thompson, still in her nurse's scrubs, carrying a cooler from the hospital. The investigation revealed everything. John Thompson had a rare disease that caused his organs to fail. His wife, using her hospital access, had been keeping him alive through crude transplants. The missing workers were just practice at first, then became spare parts. The twins had been helping their parents, groomed to believe it was normal. They'd planned to harvest parts from me next, young, healthy organs that might last longer. Mrs. Thompson is in prison now. John died during the police raid. The twins are in psychiatric care, still drawing pictures of the barn. I'm in nursing school, ironically. But I only work day shifts, and I check every patient's history obsessively. Sometimes when it rains, I think about those small muddy handprints leading to the barn. About how the Thompson family redefined devotion and turned their love into a horror story. About how normal everything seemed until I saw what was behind that red door. The Morrison Building was the newest addition to downtown. Its glass and steel structure still partially wrapped in construction scaffolding. As an aspiring photography student, I couldn't help but admire its clean lines while riding the elevator to the 47th floor. The babysitting gig had come through my roommate. Her cousin knew a wealthy photographer who needed someone to watch her 8-year-old son while she worked in her home studio. Miss Chen's apartment took up half the floor, all clean lines and white surfaces. Photography equipment worth more than my college tuition was scattered everywhere. "Jackson's very independent," she explained, leading me through rooms filled with light boxes and backdrops. "He'll probably just play his video games. Just don't let him into the studio. The chemicals can be dangerous." Jackson barely looked up from his elaborate gaming setup when we were introduced. 3 monitors displayed some kind of war game, the animated violence at odds with his innocent appearance. Miss Chen kissed his head before disappearing into her studio, the heavy door clicking locked behind her. I heard the low hum of ventilation starting up. The first few hours were easy. I made Jackson dinner while he played his games, though he barely touched the food. The apartment felt sterile except for his drawings on the fridge, dozens of red circles, meticulously colored in. When I asked about them, he said they were eyes. "Mom's models all have pretty eyes," he explained. "She keeps them in special jars." I dismissed it as a child's imagination, but something about those drawings nagged at me. Around midnight, I noticed light under the studio door despite no sounds of movement inside. Jackson had finally gone to bed, and curiosity got the better of me. The door was solid steel, hospital grade, with biohazard warnings I hadn't noticed earlier. The tablet controlling the apartment's smart systems showed camera feeds from every room, except the studio. That feed was just static. I found a maintenance menu listing emergency protocols, including one for containment breach that would seal off the entire floor. Why would a photography studio need containment protocols? Looking for answers, I checked Jackson's room. Under his bed, I found medical textbooks and a journal filled with detailed anatomical drawings, far too advanced for an 8-year-old. The margins contained notes in Miss Chen's handwriting. Subject 23, rejection at 48 hours. Subject 24, promising. Green pigmentation suggests successful binding. The bathroom revealed more disturbing clues. Behind the mirror, I found surgical instruments and prescription bottles with labels from research labs. A hamper contained towels with brownish stains. Everything in the apartment suddenly felt like a prop, staged perfection hiding something monstrous. My phone's search history from that night tells the story. Missing persons reports for local models, all last seen at photography sessions. Scientific papers about experimental transplant procedures. Miss Chen's name on research documents about ocular regeneration before her medical license was revoked. The pieces started fitting together. A scream from the studio shattered the silence. Not Miss Chen's, someone else. The keypad lock had been damaged recently, scratch marks on the frame suggesting desperate attempts to escape. As I stood there, frozen, Jackson appeared beside me. "They never last long," he said calmly. "The new eyes reject the host. Mom's trying to fix me." The door opened with a hiss of escaping air. What I saw wasn't a photography studio, it was a laboratory. Behind the false walls of backdrops and light boxes were medical equipment and specimen jars. Each jar contained human eyes, floating in preservation fluid, categorized by color. A stainless steel table held restraints and surgical tools. Everything was perfectly organized, methodically labeled. The photography session was still in progress. On a nearby camera's display screen, I saw images documenting surgical procedures. Miss Chen had been experimenting with eye transplants, using models looking for their big break as unwitting donors. But the real horror was in the medical files. Jackson had a rare genetic condition causing his eyes to deteriorate. She'd been harvesting replacements, trying to save his sight. I don't clearly remember escaping. The emergency stairs were a blur of flashing lights and my own panicked breathing. I called the police from the street, watching more lights fill the high-rise windows as sirens wailed. They found 3 fresh victims in various stages of processing, dozens of preserved specimens, years of detailed records. The investigation uncovered everything. Miss Chen had been a pioneering ophthalmologist before losing her license for unethical experiments. She'd used her new identity as a photographer to continue her work, targeting ambitious models who wouldn't be immediately missed. Jackson was both her son and her test subject. She'd been using him to perfect her transplant technique. I still study photography, but I can't look at portraits the same way. I notice eyes too much. Their color, their clarity, the stories they might tell. Jackson lives with relatives now, his vision slowly fading despite his mother's brutal attempts to prevent it. Sometimes I think about those red circles he drew, how he tried to warn me in his own way, about how his mother turned photography, the art of capturing light in people's eyes, into something tragically dark.